The military seizes power in Guinea-Bissau a day before Sunday's presidential election results were due to be announced. The African Union and the West African regional bloc ECOWAS have condemned the coup. Why has it happened? And what are the implications? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. After voting on Sunday, the people of Guinea-Bissau in West Africa had hoped to find out on Thursday who their president would be. Instead of someone they voted for, it turned out to be an army general installed after a military takeover on Wednesday. The main opposition party was barred from the election. The incumbent president, Umaro Sissoco Embalo, and his opponent, Fernando Dias da Costa, had both declared victory before the army took control. The coup is one of many since independence from Portugal in 1974 and follows others across the region in recent years. One of the poorest countries in the world, Guinea-Bissau is accused of being a major international drug trafficking hub. So why did the army seize power now? And what are the implications, not just for Guinea-Bissau, but the wider region? We'll explore these issues with our guests in a moment, but first, this report by Katia Lopez-Horayan.
The military has taken power in Guinea-Bissau. Soldiers have dissolved state institutions, closed the borders, and imposed a curfew. They say they uncovered a plot to rig the outcome of Sunday's presidential election. Incumbent President Umaro Sissoco Embalo, a former general, has been deposed. He and his main challenger, Fernando Dias da Costa, both claimed victory. But the coup came before the official results were announced.
Obviously, the Secretary General is following the situation with deep concern. He appeals to all national stakeholders in Guinea-Bissau to exercise restraint and respect the rule of law.
Multiple military takeovers and attempted coups have been recorded in Central and West Africa in the past 5 years. Guinea-Bissau is the latest, just weeks after another failed attempt. And authorities in Burkina Faso foiled a coup plot last year. Elected governments in Gabon and Niger were overthrown in 2023. And before that, in Guinea, Chad, and Mali. The overthrows reflect political instability, insecurity, and economic hardship. While each country has unique circumstances, these factors are common across all of them.
In the health sector, there are specialist doctors, but not enough equipment. Roads and infrastructure are a challenge. There is still a lot of work to be done, including in education.
In Guinea-Bissau, a small nation of 2.2 million people, drug trafficking is another challenge. The United Nations and the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration have labeled it a narco state because it's a hub for moving drugs between Latin America and Europe.
The drug cartel's influence is depending on the existence of the lack of the legitimacy of the governing. If, for example, we have military coup, they'll be more likely to create an environment through which they can grow their business by supporting or funding those who are in the army so that they can shut their eyes and let them grow their business.
The West African regional bloc ECOWAS has condemned the coup and called for the immediate release of the president and other officials. Katia Lopez-Horayan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's now bring in our guests. Joining us from Abuja is Kabir Adamu, the Managing Director of Beacon Security and Intelligence, which provides risk and security management solutions in Nigeria and the Sahel. Bram Posthumus is a political and economic analyst specializing in West Africa and the Sahel region. He's joining us from Abidjan. And Ovigwe Eguegu is a peace and security policy analyst at the consultancy development Reimagined. Also joining us from Abuja. Warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for your time. Kabir Adamu, start us off. So we now have some soldiers claiming that they intervened to stop what they describe as the manipulation of results. Fernando Dias insists the president staged a fake coup to avoid defeat. Both have declared victory, as you know. From where you sit, was this a coup to, quote unquote, protect the election, or was it a power struggle disguised as one?
It appears to be a power struggle. The fact that the election results have not been announced, they would have been announced today, but then unfortunately, the country was not given the opportunity to even know what the results of the elections were. The statement by the junta indicating that they are aware of a plot, if they had presented evidence to show that indeed there was a plot, and that the plot was meant to, as it were, sabotage the elections and the announcement of the results of the election, maybe it would have been more believable. But unfortunately, they didn't. They are yet to also indicate the circumstances behind the plot. So it appears to me that this is a clear attempt to circumvent the will of the people. And of course, it follows what we've seen in countries like Mali, Niger, and the other countries that currently are governed by military juntas.
We're going to look at the coups in other countries in just a short while on the program. But Bram, let me come over to you because you've documented Guinea-Bissau's long pattern of coups over the decades. So given that history, does this latest coup fit into sort of the old script that you've documented, or is this a new chapter?
This looks like a new chapter. I mean, circumstances have changed over the decades, ever since the first coup happened in 1980, 6 years into independence. But what we need to realize is that the now deposed former president Umaro Sissoco Embalo had built an ecosystem around himself, a cabinet of ministers, a presidential guard that was built upon his personality. So in a sense, there was already a kind of a coup ongoing during the 5 years he was in power. What's interesting about this particular coup is that it sort of reflects what happened in Mali and Niger, in the sense that both sitting presidents had big spats with the persons who were supposed to assure their security. This seems to be a repetition of that. So the big question really is, what happened between President Embalo and the man who was supposed to assure his security and who's now taken power for himself?
Okay, Ovigwe, despite the opposition confident that Dias won, we're not seeing the crowd celebrating the military takeover, as perhaps we've seen in other countries in the past. So what does this absence of people coming out and the popular mobilization tell you about public trust in both civilian leaders as well as the armed forces and the military?
Yes, I mean, the fact that we're not seeing people celebrating this coup provides insight into the attitude of the Guinean public, because they participated in an election. The election had about 65% turnout. So the people were strongly invested in the electoral process. Now, hearing that a coup has taken place just 24 hours before the results of that election were to be announced, it can become very deflating. So the spirit of democracy has been insulted by the coup. Furthermore, the pushes, what they've done is to immediately institute a curfew which banned people from coming out. Although if this was a popular, or say populist coup, I do not think that kind of order of curfew would have been put in place, because they want to show that they have people's support and that they have some form of legitimacy to do what they have done. But because they know they don't have that, it was very expedient that they put in that curfew to keep the people back at home from protesting the coup.
Kabir, the AU, ECOWAS, the UN, all condemning the coup. Election observers themselves reportedly have been detained. Does any of this external pressure, do you think, translate into real leverage on the ground?
Unfortunately, no. If we relate it with what has happened in other countries where similar military takeovers occur. In Niger, if you recall, the stance by all the multilateral bodies was even tougher. They had at one point even threatened the military intervention, but that did not stop the coupists from continuing. In this instance, the rhetoric seems like more of a script. And I think what this tells us more than anything is that the instruments used by these multilateral bodies for protecting democratic traditions in their member states is failing. In the case of ECOWAS, they currently have a team of observers headed by Nigerian former president, who more or less has been caught in this lockdown ordered by the military. So unfortunately, this instrument is weak. And I think this is one of the things that the coupists are also using against these multilateral bodies. Going forward, this is one area that I'm sure both the regional body ECOWAS and the continental body AU would have to look more closely at. How do they reduce this potential for sitting presidents to elongate their stance, to as it were, suffocate democratic traditions that unfortunately ends up leading to military takeovers like this.
Bram, does Guinea-Bissau's crisis sit within sort of the broader West African coup belt, Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, or is its instability rooted in its own very specific reasons, and what are they?
It's the latter. The Guinea-Bissau doesn't have the problem of a jihadist terrorist insurgency such as exists in the Sahel, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Guinea-Bissau has a past that is rooted in the independence struggle against Portugal, which was very intense, and as you mentioned in your introduction, resulted in independence in 1974. Both the then ruling party, PARGC, and the armed forces of Guinea-Bissau stem from that same root. So the independence struggle against Portugal produced a hybrid body, both political and military, which had instability built into it almost from the beginning. And this is what we see play out again today. You do recall that in the late 1990s, for instance, there was even a civil war raging in Guinea-Bissau, including the capital, for the very same reasons, and also with international regional implications that we may come to talk about later. But instability has always been a feature of the political military process in Guinea-Bissau.
Ovigwe, do you agree with what Bram is saying? And also, you often hear across the coups in the region, we hear the same themes, right? Those are weak institutions, fragmented elites, external meddling at some time. So given Guinea-Bissau's decades-long history of coups, as we've been discussing, which of those factors are the most decisive in this latest coup?
I think primarily it will be from internal dynamics within the country. That's not to say that there isn't the possibility of an external component. But just like the previous speaker was mentioning, the issues that would lead to a coup have already been in the system. Look at even President Embalo's 5 years in office. In the 5 years that's been in office, he suspended the parliament twice, in 2022 and in 2023. He had tried to centralize power several attempts because he wanted to get rid of the semi-presidential system, which compels him to share power with the parliament. So a series of deadlock, and amidst all that is economic challenges. See, one of the poorest countries in the world, just like was there earlier mentioned. So the country itself has a lot of fragility built in. That's not to say there's not an external dynamic to this, because Guinea-Bissau itself is at the crossroad of a major global illicit trade, which is that of cocaine and fentanyl, all of that coming from out of Latin America. So there is a narco politics and criminalization of the states that makes it very vulnerable to these sort of captures, because a lot of money is involved.
Kabir, so just going off of what Ovigwe was saying about the narco trade, cocaine profits are reportedly larger than the country's GDP, right? That's one statistic that we're getting. How central do you think is that struggle over these illicit networks to understanding perhaps who moved against whom and why we're now seeing a coup?
Well, the geographic location of Guinea-Bissau and the fact that you've got weak institutions, the history of, unfortunately, involvement of these narcotic cartels in both the country's political dynamic and its economy, I think is extremely central to this conversation. It's still early to determine in very clear terms whether there are direct involvement, as it were, of those cartels. But if we're going to go by the history of the country and the fact that even the military over time has been, fingers have been pointed at the military itself, not just in terms of its political potency, but the influence that the cartels have in, the military itself. So it's very likely, again, time would tell, the actions of the junta would also tell, and it would help us in determining, whether or not these cartels do have a role to play. And the bigger picture, I think, would be in terms of the consequences for the continent, and then, of course, for the drug trafficking industry, as it were, in the country. The U.S., as you are very much aware, has an eye on this. And at what point would Trump kind of focus on what's going on in Guinea-Bissau at the moment? So there will be a lot of ramifications, I think, depending on what way this goes. If at all, the Latin cartels have a hand, and then they kind of stabilize this junta, and then we see what happened in previous times when the country became a regional hub, as it were, for drug trafficking, then there would definitely be consequences for the country and the continent.
Bram, what do you think about this drug trafficking issue? Because there's one report by the Global Initiative which says that the cocaine trade boomed under Embalo. So do you believe that the military's move was perhaps part of an internal struggle over control of this trade?
Well, it's interesting because the last coup, at least the last alleged coup that Embalo alleged happened and which led to his dissolving the parliament for the second time, was an attack, a very, very violent attack on what's the building known as the Palacio do Governo, which is where the ministries are and where he was heading a ministerial meeting. That led to at least 12 dead and a great deal of damage to the building. And there were skeptical voices at the time, also inside Guinea-Bissau, and said, hang on a minute, this may not even have been a coup. This could be some kind of a score settling between criminal gangs who don't see eye to eye over drug profits. That is a theory that was making the rounds at the time. And the implication, obviously, not explicitly mentioned, but still there, was that even the government and maybe even the then president himself were involved. It needs a caveat here as well, I have to say, because I can tell you that Guineans, by and large, resent the monarch and narco state. Let's be very clear about this. It is an issue that is implicating the top of the military political elite in the country. The vast majority of Guineans trying to get by selling cashew. Cashew is the main export product of the country. Some of them are fishing, some of them are obviously planting and growing rice. So the majority of the Guineans have nothing to do with the narcotics trade. They do suffer from it because it's corrupted the elites, it's corrosive in the society, it leads to a drug addiction problem among the poorer parts of the population, and it doesn't solve any problems, and the money stays high up there and they never see it. So that is a caveat that needs to be added here.
Okay, Ovigwe, you were nodding along. Do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I mean, he's very correct because cashews make up 90% of the country's exports and provides the income for 80% of the population. Right. So this is a country that is very much agriculture based, and it doesn't really give that sense of a true narco state, more like a narco regime. So if the people at the top are the ones really in control of things, and these transit routes, so it stands to reason that it is they who will be fighting. And don't forget, a couple of years ago, the head of the Navy was actually implicated in the U.S. sting operation, right? And that was one of the very high-profile cases where we saw very high-level officials being implicated in the drug trade. In the last unilateral summit, the U.S. president hosted 5 African presidents. President Embalo was among the delegation that went. There were talks about cooperation on security, maritime, minerals, etc. So it's expected that he would, after that meeting, was working with the U.S. side to try to ensure that his country is no longer used as a hub, because we know that this presidency of President Trump has been focused to some extent on trying to clamp down on global drug trade, fentanyl and other narcotics. Yeah.
Kabir, what are the national implications of this coup?
Well, first off is the disruption of the democratic system. And of course, already we're likely to see some form of punitive action from ECOWAS and then, of course, from EU. If that happens, we're not sure what direction the junta will take. If they can decide to go in the direction of what countries like Mali, Niger, geographically speaking, it's going to be a little bit difficult for them, but then it's possible. And so in the long run, one of the consequences would be a consolidation, as it were, of this non-democratic rule within the sub-region. And of course, by extension, it also speaks to the fact, the weakness of the regional body, which is ECOWAS. On the whole, it doesn't look well for the sub-region.
Bram, what could be the regional implications?
Well, Guinea-Bissau is a bit of a special case. It has a different history from the surrounding countries. It's neither a French nor a British former colony. It was with Cape Verde, which is offshore, the one Portuguese West African colony. So in that sense, it has a different position as compared to the other, certainly politically. There might be, for instance, a bit of mediation going on behalf of the CPLP, which is the Association of Portuguese-speaking countries in the world, which tends to be very discreet, sometimes has a bit of effect. I do agree with the previous speaker that ECOWAS and the regional bodies like it are going to be very, very ineffective in trying to handle this affair. I mean, they've been having an on and off presence in Guinea-Bissau for the past 15 years or so, and their impact has been very limited. Unfortunately, for the large majority of the Bissau-Guinean population, this coup will change absolutely nothing. Their lives will still be in a very dire strait. They will try to scrape by on what they make off the land and or in the marketplace, and their poverty levels will remain as they are. And the same thing applies to basic services. We've had wave after wave of strikes in both the healthcare and the education services under the Embalo regime, and the main issues were always back pay, working conditions, and the fact that they were not taken seriously as a force that keeps parts of the country going. And again, these are very basic issues that this coup will obviously not address.
Ovigwe, look, ECOWAS may consider sanctions, right? But Guinea-Bissau, as we know, relies heavily on imports and aids. So how could the sanctions, how hard, rather, would they hit ordinary people? And what's the likelihood, rather, of them influencing the junta at all?
So, first of all, I think let's look at what was really going on economically in Guinea-Bissau before this coup. This year they were targeting 260,000 ton harvest for cashew, which is actually a very good number considering recent figures. The GDP was growing about 4.8 over 5.1%. And they were even oil exploration going on offshore by Chevron, right? So from an economic point of view, looking at the legal and legitimate economy, there was a lot of enthusiasm that something good is happening and this is likely to continue. The political process and the election process was also seen as a not necessarily a disruptor of this economic trajectory, but it should be an enabler. So if they were able to have a positive and peaceful transition of power, that would also strengthen the economic momentum. Now, with this coup, I see a lot of risk for the economy because, one, this is sanctions aside. One, there might be flights of the investors, people doing this oil exploration. They might not be interested anymore because of the political risks. This might also impact exports of cashew and all of the trade that goes on between Guinea-Bissau and neighboring countries if ECOWAS does go ahead with an embargo. So the country is already very fragile. Right. And I see why they want to put an embargo, but I think they have to consider the economic context and that this is already a very fragile country before putting on those sanctions.
So Kabir, how does this all end? From 6 to 12 months down the line, how does it end? A return to civilian rule, a more entrenched junta? What happens?
I mean, given the script that most coupists in the West African sub-region kind of go through, my guess would be a consolidation of the junta, probably come up with a transition plan in the minimum 2 years. And then within that period, depending on what also happens within the political space, we may see some disruption here or there, unfortunately.
Bram, what do you think? I mean, the junta has sworn in a transitional president for 1 year. We know that it suspended institutions until further notice, according to them. So practically speaking, what happens next and how does it end?
Well, it's a bit of a crystal ball gazing exercise. What we do know going on what's been happening in this region for the past 5 to 10 years, juntas have a well-established habit of breaking their own promises. And so what we might well see over the next year is, consolidation of power in the junta. What's interesting here is that the junta has not only arrested President Embalo, ex-President Embalo, also the opposition, both the man who claimed victory, Diaz, and Domingos Simoes Pereira, who was the leader of the former ruling party, PAIGC. And so it seems to me that the junta has basically confirmed that it has no faith in the political process and it has no faith in those who are driving this process. Where this will end, quite likely an extended transition, and then perhaps either one of their own will be running for the presidency or they will find a candidate that is to their liking. But it doesn't look good.
Okay, on that note, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you to all my guests for joining us. Kabir, Adamu, Bram Posthumus and Ovigwe, Eguegu, thank you so much. Thanks for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can join the conversation on X as well. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. For myself and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching and bye-bye for now.